Welcome to my channel. Sit back and listen to the best true crime stories. Let's go.
This is an incredible and sad story about a sick little Gypsy Rose Blanchard was born to Claudine Pitter and Rod Blanchard. Such an exotic name, literal translation of the name Gypsy Rose, was due to the choice of both. Claudine liked the name Gypsy, and Rod was an ardent fan of the band Guns N' Roses. Shortly before the birth of the girl in July 1991, the couple separated. According to Rod, he realized that he married for the wrong reasons. Despite Claudine's attempts to get Rod back, he would not return, and Dee Dee and the newborn returned to her parents. Gypsy was a very bright little girl. Bobby Pitter, Claudine's nephew, had this to say about his little cousin. When Gypsy came into the world, it was already clear that she was very intelligent. You could see that from the documentary records. She pointed out where her head was, her fingers knew how old she was, and she was 1 year old. Despite the somewhat premature birth, little Gypsy didn't have any particular health problems. In truth, according to the accounts of Rod, who was still in contact with her daughter at the time, Claudine believed her 3-month-old daughter had sleep apnea. Gypsy was taken to the hospital, but tests did not confirm the mother's fears. Nevertheless, Claudine became convinced that her daughter had many health problems, which she attributed to some kind of chromosomal disorder. Sleep apnea is a disorder characterized by pauses in breathing or periods of shallow breathing during sleep. Sick girl. When Gypsy was about 7 or 8 years old, she suffered a minor injury in a minor accident on her grandfather's motorcycle. Claudine discovered that this was a visible sign of deep injuries that would undoubtedly require several major surgeries. From that point on, Gypsy found herself confined to a wheelchair. Gypsy allegedly stopped going to school in 2nd grade. After that, her mother began to teach her at home, referring to her daughter's sickness. Gypsy also learned to read on her own, including books from the Harry Potter series. Time passed. Gypsy's father, Rod, married for the 2nd time. Claudine, on the other hand, never remarried, living with her father and stepmother. The stepmother soon began to suffer from some chronic illnesses. The woman later left the family and moved with Gypsy to Slidell. The community and Rod helped Claudine with money and housing in the new place. Everything seemed to be going well, but trouble was not slow to appear. Visits to the Children's Hospital of New Orleans soon became regular. Claudine anxiously pointed out to the doctors the problems with her daughter's hearing and vision, as well as a muscle biopsy. There was also talk of seizures, albeit rare, and Gypsy was prescribed an anti-seizure drug in addition. Several surgeries ensued. Trouble doesn't come alone. The devastating Hurricane Katrina in August 2005 caused devastating damage to the neighborhood where Gypsy and her mother lived, and they had to move to Covington. There, Claudine discovered that her daughter's medical records, including her birth certificate, had been destroyed in the flooding. A doctor in the Ozarks suggested they move to their native Missouri, and they were moved there the following month. At first, Claudina and Gypsy lived in a rented house in Aurora, in the southwestern part of the state. They soon received support from the Oley Foundation, which advocated for the rights of people who needed to be fed through special food tubes. In 2008, Habitat for Humanity HFHI helped them in the same way by building a small house in Springfield especially for them. The house was equipped with a wheelchair ramp and a hot tub. At this time, the press began to actively cover the life of Gypsy and Dee Dee, a single mother, a seriously ill non-walking daughter, running away from Katrina. Now Claudine and Gypsy were not alone in their trouble. They were supported by a huge number of different people. It seemed their troubled lives were finally starting to get better. Charitable donations started pouring in. Gypsy began to frequent the Ronald McDonald House during medical appointments. as well as she was organized free trips with Walt Disney World. To see doctors from Kansas City, mothers and daughters were allowed free angel flights. In addition, Rod continued to make monthly payments of $100–200 to them, occasionally sent gifts to Gypsy, and occasionally made phone calls to her. He and his new wife regularly tried to visit Gypsy and Claudine, but for various reasons Dee Dee kept changing plans, and they were never able to meet. At that point, Gypsy's appearance was already quite pitiful. Small stature about 150 cm, almost toothless mouth, huge glasses for half of her face. Hearing her thin childish voice, people were convinced that Dee Dee was right, and that Rose was severely mentally retarded. Dee Dee estimated her mental development as that of an 8-year-old child. Gypsy had to wear wigs to hide her baldness because one of her diagnoses was cancer. When leaving home, the girl took oxygen tanks and a food tube with her. Some of her salivary glands had rotted away, and she had small tubes implanted in her ears due to multiple infections. Despite everything, Claudine never stopped supporting her daughter. She was with her around the clock. She sewed fun wigs for the girl to hide her baldness. She was always looking for new doctors to make the best of Gypsy's difficult life. When they were pressed by journalists with difficult and uncomfortable questions, Mom always held her daughter's hand, providing moral support. It seemed that the girl was kept alive only because of Claudine. Shock on the afternoon of June 14, Dee Dee and Gypsy's Facebook page posted a snarky note. "This C***T is dead." Then, 17 minutes later, the caption was followed up with a quiz. "This C***CK is dead. I stabbed this pig and abused her innocent daughter. She screamed so loud, lol." The post received hundreds of stunned responses from online users and was seen by family members. Some asked if Dee Dee was reacting this way to the movie she watched. Others thought the account had been hacked. After the added message, her friends began to worry and decided to visit Claudine because she did not answer even cell phone calls. On the way, they remembered that Claudine and Gypsy often leave on trips for medical purposes without alerting the others, and they calmed down a bit. Maybe someone really did hack the page and Claudine isn't picking up her phone because she's busy traveling, but Dee Dee's van box track, modified to carry her daughter's wheelchair, was in place outside the house. The windows of the house had protective film on them, which made it difficult to see anything inside in the low light. On a cursory inspection by them and the neighbors who joined them, nothing unusual was noticed. Several of Gypsy's wheelchairs were in their places. Without breaking into the house, Claudine's friends called 911 and summoned the police, but even when they arrived, they had to wait for a search warrant to be issued. When police entered the house, Dee Dee's lifeless body was quickly discovered. She was lying on the bed, covered in blood from stab wounds. Gypsy was not in the house. Everyone who knew Claudine and her daughter was horrified, for even if Gypsy had not been killed inside the house, she was completely helpless outside without a wheelchair, oxygen tanks, and a few medications. Woodman C., a neighbor who was also present at that moment when the police entered the house, suddenly revealed that she knew something interesting. Gypsy had a secret internet buddy. Because Gypsy, hiding communication with him from her mother, used her computer, the woman had printouts of their conversations. After reading the texts, the intrigued police asked Facebook for the IP address from which the last messages were sent to Dee Dee's page. The address led to Wisconsin. The next day, police raided the Wisconsin home. There they found Nicholas Gojan and an unharmed Gypsy Rose firmly on her feet. From that moment on, everything turned upside down. Gypsy didn't need a wheelchair. She didn't have leukemia, and she didn't have severe asthma. Nor did she have the most dreaded diagnosis that every one of us dreads to hear: cancer. And there wasn't even mental retardation. There was Claudine Blanchard with Munchausen syndrome. Everything that those around her saw year after year turned out to be a lie. That lie began an incredibly long time ago. Remember that incident from childhood when little Rose suffered a minor injury falling off her grandfather's motorcycle. It was what's known as an abrasion wound, which sounds menacing, but is actually just an abrasion caused by abrasion of the top layers of skin against a rough surface like asphalt. An abrasion on the knee. Just a skin abrasion, but it served as a trigger for Claudine, probably not the first, but one of the earliest discovered. Next, Dee Dee will put Gypsy in a wheelchair citing, among other things, muscular dystrophy, despite the bewildered faces of her family. Gradually, she would distance herself from them, cutting back on communication because of the unnecessary questions. The family had their reasons for asking those questions, and they were not just about Gypsy. I'll mention that a little later. An excerpt from an interview with Bobby Pitter. Reporter, did your father know that Gypsy could walk on her own? Bobby, yes, we all knew. We knew everything. We played, we hung out. All together. I was a little older than the rest of them. She was the same age as my younger siblings and my cousins, so we all played together. They would jump and play around, and there was nothing special about it. When Dee Dee saw Gypsy, she used to say that her feet would get them in trouble. She would say that the girl's feet would start to deteriorate, and so Gypsy should go and soak them in the bathtub. She was telling Gypsy that her feet were bad because she has muscular dystrophy. I didn't know until a later moment what it came to and what she continued on to next. I didn't realize, but she kept talking about it, adding that it was only going to get worse from here. That's how she confined Gypsy to a wheelchair, but Gypsy was running around, wheeling other kids around in the wheelchair, and we were like, this kid doesn't have any problems, she's fine. Dee Dee is overdramatizing. That's what my dad said about her. Reporter, what about the other ailments Dee Dee said were plaguing Gyps? Bobby, all of that came up when they moved away from us. She said some things about Gypsy's eyes getting messed up. My dad once said that he said to Dee Dee, Dee Dee, what are those glasses on Gypsy's face? And he said he grabbed them and looked through them and said they looked like kaleidoscopes. Like Dee Dee was purposely trying to ruin her eyes by making her wear some kind of like glasses. I heard different things about how Gypsy's life was going. In my subconscious, I often say to Christy, Gypsy is fine. I don't know what's wrong with Dee Dee, but in Jesus' name, I don't think there's anything wrong with that kid. She just has a bad mom. When Gypsy came into the world, it was already clear that she was very smart. You can see it in the documentary footage. She pointed out where her head was, her fingers, knew how old she was, and she was 1 year old. Dee Dee could turn this child into a true genius and develop her, and it seems that she was doing just that at first. Then for some reason she completely flipped the script and started making things worse. Claudine continued to find more and more illnesses in Gypsy with rapt attention. The girl grew up believing completely what her mother told her. She believed that without her mother she was a cripple who wouldn't last a couple of days. Dee Dee helped her to believe this at every opportunity. With each of her mother's interventions, Gypsy's life got worse. For example, her gums had rotted away with multiple and naturally unnecessary Botox injections. Her mother shaved the girl's head herself to simulate chemotherapy, forced her to eat liquid nutrition or food shavings through a feeding tube, even though she sobbed and assured her that she could eat regular food. Busted. The nightly breathing support machine was another reason not to let Gypsy visit her father and another way to keep her tied to the house. Rose was chained to it for the whole night, and as a result, she had to forget about sleepovers. Excerpt from an interview with Bobby Pitter. Bobby, that's right. Jeep, I couldn't go to Rod's house because she was encased in all these apparatuses. She was hooked up to the machines even at night, so she couldn't get away even for one night. That's what gave Diddy her freedom all these years. Reporter, so that was the main method of control, telling Rod that Gypsy couldn't leave the house. Bobby, yeah, I can't take her. There's no way. She can't miss this night. If I take her to you, I've got her dead. That's the picture Dee Dee was painting of him. As you will have noticed, by various tricks, Claudine deliberately prevented Rod from seeing his daughter. Even though he sent her money every month, Dee Dee told her neighbors that Rod was a drug addict, an alcoholic, not caring about his daughter's health and not sending them a dime. However, Rod never fought for custody of his daughter after all. It seemed that Gypsy was seriously ill, and her mother was successfully managing all the medical problems. He saw everything the same as the rest of us. However, I would be lying if I said that Dee Dee and Gypsy remained beyond any suspicion. Not all doctors took Claudine at her word. Some demanded detailed examinations of the girl. Some demanded documentation. In such cases, Dee Dee simply stopped going to these doctors, or, if the suspicions were serious, left for another locality. But there was one doctor who was different from all the others, Bernardo Flesterstein of Springfield, whose specialty was pediatric neurology. He had examined Gypsy when her mother had described her muscular dystrophy to him and found nothing of what she was talking about. Doubting, he ordered the girls blood tests, and an MRI they showed no abnormalities. Examining Gypsy again more carefully, he pronounced, "I don't see any reason why she's not walking." Dee Dee began to explain something confusingly, but her story was too unconvincing. When he contacted the doctors in New Orleans with whom Gypsy had previously been seen, he also learned new refutations of the diagnosis. Then the thing that could have ended this horror story happened. Bernardo began to suspect that Dee Dee had Munchausen's syndrome. However, Claudine was able to outsmart him by accessing Flasterstein's notes and stopping taking Gypsy to him. Flasterstein did not follow up on Gypsy's fate further, though he did advise other doctors to take a closer look at her. In 2009, an anonymous person called the police and told them that Cotton was using different names and birth dates for his daughter and himself. He also suggested that Gypsy wasn't as sick as she appeared on the outside. The investigating officers were confronted with Dee Dee's innocent explanation of what was going on. According to her, her horrible drug addict husband had been stalking them and trying to trace their whereabouts through every possible document, and by changing dates and names, she was throwing him off the trail. Dee Dee was believed. The case was never prosecuted. Resistance, what about Gypsy herself? Couldn't she have signaled anyone for help? Didn't she try to run, tell the press what was going on? No one still knows exactly when Gypsy realized her mother was taking her to her grave. But it didn't happen all at once. As noted earlier, for most of her life, Gypsy had blindly trusted her mother in everything. During the interview, her mother held her hand, but it was not a supportive gesture at all. As soon as Gypsy said something careless, her mother would discreetly but painfully squeeze her daughter's fragile fingers. Often after that, when the journalists left, Dee Dee could hit her daughter several times with her hand or a hanger. Although all friends and relatives believed Dee Dee about the girl being a teenager, by 2010, in fact, Gypsy was an adult and began to see if she could break free from her mother's grip. One of the neighbors recalls an incident in 2009-2010 when Gypsy came to him at night on her own feet, trying to leave for the local hospital to see some guy she knew and had fond feelings for. To their misfortune, they were quickly spotted by a group of people who, remembering Gypsy's usual helplessness, thought the girl was in trouble. They accused him of taking advantage of an underage, mentally retarded girl. Gypsy was able to find some of her papers at the hospital, including a birth certificate with the correct dates, proving that she was an adult. However, Dee Dee quickly realized where her daughter was and rushed to the hospital, where she showed her daughter's real birth certificate with the wrong dates and made Gypsy apologize to everyone present. Since 2001, Rose has been allowed to attend under her mother's supervision, of course, a science fiction and fantasy festival, sometimes even in the costume of a character. In 2011, she used this to make another escape attempt. She also failed. Her mother found her in a hotel room with some man Gypsy knew from the internet. Dee Dee, once again showing a fake birth certificate, threatened to report him to the police. Dee Dee then smashed her computer with a hammer in front of Gypsy, promising to do the same to Rose herself in another escape attempt. Also, Gypsy was locked up for a period of time. Claudine didn't stop at intimidation, though. She went to the police and filed paperwork about her daughter's mental disability so that if she tried to seek help there, they wouldn't believe her. Around 2012, Gypsy started using the internet again, waiting for the vigilant Claudine to go to bed. She met Nicholas Gojan on a forum with whom she became fast friends, and then something more erupted between the young people. Nicholas had plenty of problems, too, a criminal record for indecent exposure and a history of mental illness, autism or multiple personality disorder. In 2014, Gypsy Rose admitted to a 23-year-old neighbor, Alex Woodmansey, that she and Nicholas had discussed names for future children. Gypsy, who had about 5 different Facebook accounts, and Gojan often flirted online, sometimes using elements of BDSM. Woodmansey attempted to get her to talk, fearing that Gypsy might have been victimized by an online sex offender. Despite all the obstacles her mother organized for Gypsy, communication with Nicholas continued. Gypsy kept in contact with Woodmansey, and Woodmansey kept printouts of their correspondence until 2014. The following year, Gypsy arranged for Dee Dee to meet with Gojan during a trip to Springfield. The plan was for Nicholas to be introduced to his mother at a movie theater. Once Gypsy and Gojan met in real life, according to Gojan, Rose took him into the bathroom where they had sex. For some reason, the introduction to his mother did not take place, however. They continued to correspond online and began to develop a plan to kill Dee Dee in more detail. Murder in mid-June 2015, Nicholas traveled to Springfield again. Some day before June 12, Gypsy managed to get him into the house and gave him a knife, realizing it would be used to kill Dee Dee. Gojan ordered Gypsy to hide in the bathroom and cover her ears so she wouldn't witness her mother's death. Gojan then found Dee Dee sleeping in the house and stabbed her several times in her sleep. The couple took $4,000 in cash from Dee Dee's inventory and fled outside of Springfield to a motel where they holed up for several days planning their next moves. To avoid being caught with the murder weapon, the couple sent it to Gojan's house. They themselves took a bus to his home, where they were spotted by several witnesses, and noted that Gypsy was wearing a blonde wig and that she was walking unaided. On June 14, Gojan used his phone, as we already know, to post 2 updates on Dee Dee's page. Gypsy later said she was concerned that no one had discovered her mother's body after several days. She had hoped that after these Facebook messages, people would freak out, which they did, and decide to check out Claudine's house and herself. Judge sympathy for the murdered Claudine was quickly replaced by horror and compassion for Gypsy. A charge of first-degree murder under Missouri law means death or life in prison without parole. But prosecutor Dan Patterson soon announced that he did not believe it was necessary to impose those harsh measures on Gypsy or even Gojan, calling the case highly unusual. After the attorney was able to obtain medical records from Louisiana, he secured a plea bargain of second-degree murder for Gypsy. As a result, Gypsy Rose was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Gojan still faces a harsher charge, as he is believed to have initiated the murder plot, and both he and Gypsy agree that he did, in fact, kill Dee Dee. In January 2017, the trial was postponed, with prosecutors demanding a second psychiatric exam. His attorney claims the defendant has a low IQ and is on the autism spectrum, meaning his ability to think adequately is diminished. Back to the roots, let's talk about Dee Dee. Were there any early warning signs in Dee Dee's behavior? Yes, there were more than enough of them, and they appeared quite a long time ago. Here it will be appropriate to cite a large excerpt of the interview with Bobby Pitter, because someone, but the family always knows a person better than outsiders. This is the very beginning of the interview. Journalist, Lafourche Parish, where you live and where Dee and Gypsy lived, has a very friendly small-town atmosphere. How did Dee manage to pull off what she did in such a place? Bobby, Dee stayed close to my grandparents as a home counselor. She stayed home, of course, and she was a real kid. My grandfather used to say he would give her anything she wanted, and he did. Dee was a daddy's girl. My grandmother was always feeling ill, often bedridden, always complaining about ailments and all that, and I think Dee could see how she was sympathized with, but take it on a whole different level. Reporter, are you talking about Dee's mother? Bobby, yeah, my grandmother. Reporter, do you have any suspicions that Dee might have been indirectly involved in your grandmother's illnesses? Bobby, yes. When you think about it after all of this, you find that yes, maybe it makes sense. She didn't feed her grandmother or bathe her when she was sick in bed. I believe diabetes killed her because she was once bitten by a brown recluse spider, and they had to open the wound because it wouldn't heal because of the diabetes. She was getting worse, and I think Dee might have played a role in that. Reporter, and Dee also poisoned your step-grandmother, right? Bobby, yes, and she's still suffering from it, I think, because she spent several months in the hospital. We didn't know what had happened. She had internal bleeding and everything. Her GI tract was ruined because she drank fucking Roundup. Dee gave her Roundup. Reporter, why wasn't Dee given some kind of punishment for that? Bobby, I don't know. I didn't know that, and then it was too late. It turned out that during Hurricane Katrina, Dee had moved and traveled to Missouri. I heard scraps of that information from Christy Blanchard. Reporter, in the HBO documentary, Rod seems to imply that Dee practiced witchcraft or black magic. Do you know anything about that? Bobby, yes, she used to do that when she was young. In fact, I used to do that kind of bad stuff too, and I think a lot of it came out of Dee's influence. Playing with the Ouija board and all that kind of stuff. I think she used to tell my cousins that if they didn't play with the Ouija board with her, the devil would come and get them. Reporter, what? Oh my God, Bobby, she was a real manipulator using things like that. I didn't care. I was only playing with the Ouija board for fun. I was drawn to the dark. And I enjoyed it for a long period of time. I'm still drawn to the dark side of things. I don't worship the devil. I actually don't even believe in the devil, but there is good and there is bad in the world. I believe that. I think the whole religious game was just one of her ways of fascinating people, because she was just a weird character as a kid. Journalist, it was mentioned that Gypsy inevitably absorbed Dee's ability to manipulate, even if it was unconsciously. This woman had been around her whole life. A girl had to have a knack for manipulating people. Bobby, yeah, in the first scene of this documentary, when she's in the interrogation room, that's not Gypsy. It's Dee, the way she does it, the timbre of her voice, her mannerisms. Even the way she says, wait, and she extends her hand forward as if she doesn't believe him. It was like Dee. I had seen her act the same way. I recognized her mannerisms at once. When I saw it, I felt a chills from seeing it. I told my brother, look at that, buddy, that's Dee. Look, it's Dee. Yeah, it's crazy. A few final lines about the future after hearing the whole story. Dee's family realized that they had no regrets about her death. Father, stepmother, and nephew Bobby Claudin express a clear position. Dee fully deserved this ending, and Gypsy, though indirectly, the murderer, has already been punished as much as necessary. Neither of them paid for Dee's funeral or came to collect her ashes. Ultimately, Dee's ashes handed to them were dumped down the toilet. But what happens to Gypsy next, during and after prison? Reporter, do you know if Gypsy will receive any psychological help or counseling in prison? Bobby, no. That's something that Rod and I have talked about, and will continue to talk about. In fact, Rod came to visit me once, and we were talking about how he was trying to get at least, if nothing else, phone calls, because she takes phone calls. She could get psychiatric help over the phone, at least to start with. Because reprogramming her behavior will take a long time, but the road will be taken by him who walks. She's got plenty of time, let her use it wisely. Reporter, when Gypsy gets out of jail, do you think the family and community will rally around her? Bobby, like my dad says, he's going to take care of her. He wants to get her back on her feet anyway because he feels very guilty. I'm sure I would want that if I were her father. I would feel like I had completely failed her. In fact, he texted me a few days ago he wants to get a tattoo with angel wings around her portrait or something because he feels completely guilty about what happened. I can understand his feelings. I have a daughter too. I'll swim through piranhas and through fucking sharks to save her. He just bought Dee Dee's lies. He was in a predicament, and that led to the current situation. Even though Gypsy may be saved now from her mother, the aftermath of all this horror will probably never leave her. So many interventions have been made to her body, but even that is not the main thing. Her mental health is not at its best right now either. Doctors talk about a false sense of reality and PTSD.